When I was a child, my father would take me to visit my grandmother regularly. After my grandfather retired in 1915 at the age of 55, he married my grandmother and they purchased the house at Fullerton and named it Gnangwea. This name originally came from a shepherd's hut in which my great-grandfather lived when South Australia was only 10 years old, and eventually the town of Laura grew up around that hut. Fullerton was just paddocks in those days, and it suited those of a rural disposition. The City of Adelaide was a considerable distance away. This house, on only 2 hectares of land, was one of the smaller properties in the area. As you entered the front door, you came to a hall which was as big as a room. On either side of this hall were 2 rooms where I spent most of my time when I was inside. The room on the south side was the drawing room, and the room on the north, the smoking room. The drawing room was where the lady of the house did most of her entertaining, and the smoking room was where the man of the house did his entertaining. However, such strict division of entertaining was rarely observed. Granny was usually to be found in the smoking room, sitting in her chair next to the fire. Our conversations with Granny covered many subjects. She enjoyed talking about rural life and about what was happening at the family property called Lee. Some of her stories were wildly exaggerated, but others were true. There was a couch in the bay window of the smoking room, and behind it was a beautifully carved table with magazines placed neatly on top. All Granny's grandchildren liked to look at these magazines. We enjoyed the National Geographics the best because they had lots of interesting pictures. Granny particularly liked ginger beer. You could help yourself to that. And then for a treat, you could go to her special drawer in a sideboard where she stored this dark chocolate. Very often, Granny's house was full of visitors alternating between the drawing room and the smoking room. The visitors were mostly relatives and friends of Granny's children and her brother and sisters. Occasionally we went to other parts of the house. I can remember Granny showing me the sleep out and explaining that's where my dad slept when he was a boy during the hot nights. There was also a little pantry where Granny did all her bottling and preserving. It always had a particular smell of stewing fruit and baking that permeated everything. There was a seesaw, a swing, and an extensive garden. Often we helped Dad when he picked oranges and lemons or macadamias. Other times we watched the activities in Granny's paddock. There was a part-time gardener, a full-time housekeeper called Mrs. Jones, and a nurse called Margaret, because of my grandfather not being well. He lived until he was 93. I suppose they had someone come in and do some cleaning, as I don't think Mrs. Jones did the cleaning. She did nearly everything, though. She was like a Miss Wonder Woman. Granny was very kind and charitable. She laid the cornerstone of the original church, and later she laid the foundation stone for the new church with the same silver gavel. Every year for a peppercorn rent, she offered the park and certain parts of her house and yard for the annual church fair. She was particularly fond of children, and she took a great interest in the boys' home. One thing I remember Granny saying was that this park is only to be used for people's enjoyment. When I drive into Fullerton Park, I think, I live in this place, and I like to picture Granny sitting in the shade of a tree, and not only her, but the family members and the owners before her.